So I want to take a moment to talk about Daredevil Born Again, which is currently airing on Disney Plus. And I specifically want to talk about episode 8, Isle of Joy, and just how good the writing in this season has been, with demonstrating how well the writers understand what they're doing with the series. And I feel like I need to talk about it because it's executed so well, and episode 8 is the perfect example to demonstrate just how well this is written. Before I tell you about it, though, I need to tell you about a writing trope or technique called Chekhov's gun. So, Chekhov's gun is a trope or literary technique where Anton Chekhov, who loves writing short stories, essentially gave the advice where if something's not essential, it shouldn't be included in the story, which means everything included must be important. And that essentially turned into a whole thing where if a gun is shown in a story, that gun must then be used later on in that story. Otherwise, there's no point including that gun. And there are multiple variations of Chekhov's gun, as you can see from this TV Tropes article, which does tend to go on and on. One of the most famous examples of Chekhov's gun is in the movie Aliens, which uses the technique multiple times. First one being when Ripley uses the power loader at the beginning of the movie, and then at the end of the movie, she uses the same thing to defeat the Queen Alien. And even something as small as the fact that Ripley is smoking in that movie at the beginning, and then later on, she uses the lighter again to activate a fire alarm. It's essentially when foreshadowing is done really well. And I want to talk about how well it was done in Daredevil, because I think it took it a step further. Because not only does it foreshadow it in a way that pays off so well, but it was incredibly subtle because it was foreshadowing that you didn't pick up on at the time, which means we get to learn the plot details at the same time as Matt Murdock when he figures things out. And in episode 8, there are 2 smoking guns that go off at the same time. And in the examples that I gave you, they were foreshadowed in a way where you'd expect them to be used again later. But in Daredevil Born Again, it's just 2 offhand pieces of information that allowed us to come to the same conclusion as the characters on screen did. This was originally done very well in the BBC's Sherlock show. So in the first 2 seasons of the BBC's Sherlock TV series with Benedict Cumberbatch, they largely followed the plot of the books by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, but modernized. And those stories are great because they allow the reader to work things out alongside Sherlock Holmes, because you're given the information needed to help you essentially play along and deduct with him. But the later seasons of the show became what people started calling a show about smart people written by dumb people, which we get a lot of in media, where instead of lines of reasoning we can follow, it just became a smart person magically coming up with the answer, which often ended up leading to plot inconsistencies. That's why proper foreshadowing is an important part of storytelling. Now, the 2 instances in Daredevil Born Again. First being in the earlier episodes, when Matt Murdock talks about how he and Foggy would celebrate a big win in the courtroom with a specific brand of whiskey, which on its own, in isolation, was a scene that shows us Matt looking back fondly on his memories with Foggy and reminiscing. But in episode 8, when we discover that the last drink Foggy had was that exact whiskey, both the audience and Matt come to the conclusion that Foggy was celebrating something. And that completely reframes the reason why he was murdered that night. Now, most people will be so blown away by that twist, they don't see the second one coming, which is a twist of the knife. Which is why I prefer to call this Chekhov's hidden blade, because it's a knife you don't see coming, and then they add in an extra twist. And that is, why did Bullseye kill Foggy that night? We got the motive, but we don't know why he did it or who sent him to do it. And there are 2 pieces of information we had earlier in the series that point to this, but I don't think anyone would have been thinking about at the time until the revelation is made later in the episode. First being, Matt Murdock and Wilson Fisk have already met in the series face to face. In fact, Matt directly asked him about Foggy's murder, and he was listening to Wilson's heartbeat the entire time, and he knew Wilson was telling the truth about not killing Foggy. But at the same time, we, the audience, also know that Wilson Fisk has been out of the crime game for a while before he started running for mayor, and that Vanessa was the one running his criminal organizations. Now, those 2 things alone would have helped us come to the conclusion that Vanessa was the one who pulled out that hit on Foggy. But our attention is diverted by the fact that we know Wilson didn't do it, and the red herring that it was probably a personal vendetta against Daredevil, motivating Bullseye to kill Foggy and then attempt to kill Karen before Matt intervened. And it's the fact that the writers have shown such a good understanding of proper foreshadowing and are able to do so multiple times within the same series, in one episode even, clearly demonstrates that they know what they're doing when it comes to writing a good season of TV. Now, I know there are plenty of people who don't like Daredevil Born Again right now for a multitude of reasons. Some people don't like it because they've only shown the Punisher once the entire season. Some people don't like it because Matt Murdock barely puts on the suit. In fact, he's only suited up like twice so far. And some people don't like it because they, spoilers, by the way, at this point, I should have said this at the very start, because they killed off the villain of the season already. I loved Muse as a villain as well, don't get me wrong, he was fantastic, but I understand why they did it, because they wouldn't be able to use him again in any other Marvel project outside of Daredevil, because Daredevil is rated 18+, and Muse and his crimes are very violent, and he wouldn't work in a PG-12 Avengers movie or any other project without ramping up that rating. So from a business perspective, I understand why they didn't do it, but I am also somewhat disappointed by the fact that we won't see more of him. Who knows, maybe we'll get some copycats, but I thought he was a fantastic villain. And yes, you might dislike the series for all of those reasons. Absolutely valid, you're allowed to not like things or like things for whatever reason you enjoy things for, right? But I just wanted to point out, I love the writing in this show, because the writers clearly understand what they're doing. Because every episode, I want to talk about something new that really stood out to me in how the episode was carried out. We've had a fantastic bottle episode with Kamala Khan's father in that bank. And while everyone, and myself included, were very hesitant and worried about the show because of all the reshoots and the re-edits they did for the first few episodes of the season, I think it was genuinely worth it. Because you can sort of see the seams in between what was the original plan for the series, being an Elseworld alternative version of Matt separate from the Netflix series, and how they somewhat Frankensteined it together to be a continuation of the series. And I think it's genuinely interesting when you look at it through that lens. And reshoots and re-edits have not worked out previously for Marvel, so I am genuinely just so amazed at how well this turned out. And I'm really excited to see how it ends and if we get more of this. Because episode 8 just impressed me so much, I had to make my own video about it. Anyway, comment below, let me know, have you been watching Daredevil Born Again? Have I convinced you to give it a go if you haven't already? Let me know down below what you think about it, if you're enjoying it, if you're not liking it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube stuff. I also live stream on this channel, so chat with me directly when I'm live if you want. I'm always happy to talk about this show. Check out some of my other content while you're here, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Sayonara.